Hello, I'm Owen Killoran.
And I'm Cam Finerty.
And our cameraman is Patrick Rowan.
And we're here with Daniel Finerty for our History of Milwaukee interview.
And today is May 9th, 2023.
Please state your name.
John D. Finerty.
And for your early life, could you tell us about your parents?
Well, my parents are from Chicago, where I was born. My dad was, he had gone to school at Notre Dame and then dropped out into a trade school and got a pretty strong background in the construction field, and particularly with electrical work. He worked on one World's Fair down there, together with the later railroad fair they had. My mother is well, I was going to say she's Irish. She was the McFall clan. They were part Scots and part Irish, but she didn't work. She took care of a house with 4 children, who I'm told could be very difficult at times, and 2 grandmothers living with us at various times. But in any event, I worked my way through. I went to Marquette University Law School, graduated from there, I think, in 1964, 1965, and admitted to the bar. Well, I grew up in Chicago. My mom and dad were married, I think, in 1936, 1937. I was born in 1939. It was a rather remarkable time because the United States was walking into a big war. And my dad, who had worked in the electrical field for whatever reason, joined the police department in Chicago and did a lot of high-tech things, and was the driver and sometimes secretary to Edward J. Kelly, the mayor of the city, who did very much for troops that came through on their way to Europe, and turned out to be a very popular guy. But that's kind of where my connection ends with Chicago. I went to grade school down there, a Catholic grade school, and I went to Christian Brothers Catholic school, Leo High School. Leo was the name of the Pope that consecrated the school, not the name of a football player or somebody like that.
Could you tell us a little bit why they lived in Chicago, or what brought them to that area?
Well, they were both born there, and they were raised in that area, and they happened to meet. I don't know how, but for some reason their respective families knew each other, and they joined in that relationship, and things went on from there.
Do you know when you were born and where?
November 1939, which is significant only for the reason that's when Hitler invaded Poland. And I was born in, most of the births in the south side of Chicago were in Evergreen Park, the home of a huge hospital, and I can't think of exactly what the name of it is. It's run by a Catholic order of nuns, and it's a very, very busy place, very crowded. The joke was you had to wait to be born, and but my siblings went through the same drill, and they seemed to be satisfied with it, so I had no complaint.
You said you had siblings. How many siblings did you have?
I have a brother Tom, who's a couple of years younger than I am. Sister Kathleen, who's younger, and baby sister Judith Finerty. They're all living in Chicago now, and Judy is married, and Tom and Kathleen are still on their own.
You said they all reside in Chicago. Do they
Yes.
stay in the neighborhood that you grew up in, or did they move around?
They're in different parts of the city, and one's out in one of the western suburbs. The other is in the near central area, very close to Cubs Park, beautiful Wrigley Field, and my brother is in the real estate, and he had a large furniture showcase, which was not working, so he redid the first floors, and it's all glass and displays and things like that. Then the upper floors are apartments, and he lives there, and it works very well. So.
Did you go to any sporting events as a kid? Cubs games, Bulls games?
Well, I lived in the South Side, so it was a treat to go up to Wrigley Field to see the Cubs. They were an exciting team. The White Sox were the South Side team. They didn't do as well, or they didn't have action-packed football like the Cubs had and still have. But again, that was a long ride, and then you had to find a place to park your car up there, and then come out, hope it was not stolen. But it got very cold. Cubs Park is on the water, and it gets cold up there in the spring and the fall. So think about that. If somebody offers you tickets in May or June, you can freeze.
Yeah. Did you, as well as, growing up in Chicago, what was the neighborhood like? Did you have anything that stood out to you from your childhood?
Well, the nice thing was it had a streetcar line. 3 was a north-south line. 3 from, or 2 blocks east of my house, and then an east-west line, which was a half a block from my house, which fortunately went by the high school I went to, and it was not unusual to get on the particularly if the buses were back or the trains were backed up by the snow, to find all your classmates jammed into the car. I think they pushed everybody else off. But we don't talk about that because we're gentlemen, or we're supposed to be.
Yeah. How important was religion and parish life to you growing up?
Pretty much so. I periodically would be recruited as a backup altar boy. It was work to do that, and I didn't want to do it, but when things came along where extra altar boys, such as a fancy wedding where they wanted 5 altar boys and some people did, you'd go up there and sit with the priests and all the other people that came along, and you get your $5 and you were happy. But and it was a good Catholic church, a good parish, and I obviously grew up in the grade school. It was St. Therese of the Little Flower parish, and the school was just named Little Flower School. And when I went to high school and said I went to Little Flower High School, the inconsiderate people in my various classes would make funny noises, things like that, to mock my religion and my church. Although the school was Christian Brothers, Irish Christian Brothers, they were quite a crowd, and I appreciate everything they did for me, believe me.
Did most of your friends go to the same school as you growing up?
I'm sorry.
Did most of your friends go to the same school as you growing up?
Well, no. That was an area where it was safe to go out and ride your bike a mile or two on the street and run into a friend that lived in another parish or another school boundary or went to the public school. So this was not a kind of place where you had to go home when the street lights went on. You didn't necessarily do that in warm weather. Of course, when they went on, before they went on, in the cold weather, yeah, you went home, because Chicago had a way of coming up with very, very unpleasant winters. So you didn't see many people on the streets after September.
So how did you get around then if it was cold all the time?
If it was cold and I was going to school, I walked. And if it rained very bad, my mother or somebody else's mother would pick us up in the parking lot across from the school. And you had to walk that far, and the streets would be flooded and everything else, as you might imagine in old Chicago. But that was about it. It wasn't a problem of getting back and forth. So.
Aside from Cubs games, did you ever go into the city much?
Well, I was living in the city, really. It was my block was completely built up, and there were about 60% were high-rise apartment buildings, and they had a long way in from the street. So you might have a courtyard where at the street side of the house, you'd go in and you'd look, and there'd be 20 names in the mailbox. That was because you went up, you kept going upstairs, and they'd open into other hallways, and those would be populated. And they were never vacant. There was always somebody there, and you'd always run into somebody you knew. And it was a safe neighborhood because there was a lot of people there day and night, and it was because of the closeness of the people that got together. Even in the wintertime, they might go outside and make a snowman or something like that, just to keep in touch with their neighbors. So you knew everybody. You knew who worked for what, and you know where the policeman lived on the block. That word got around immediately. So my dad was a policeman who made his way up the line to captain, and he came home, and he was home, and the whole time the family was raised, with the exception of traveling with Mayor Kelly. Mayor Kelly was a wartime mayor, and he was constantly going to Washington. And it was one of those spur-of-the-moment things. Mr. Mayor, the mayor wants to see you. He had his case packed. He walked out the door. His downtown squad took him to the train, and the train headed out south towards Washington. If my dad was home, or if my dad was with him, my dad would just get on the train. If my dad was home, my dad would be told, your train will pick you up. So he had everything set out ready for, and depending on where he was going, it would make the difference in a raincoat or a trench coat or whatever. And he'd get in the car and drive to, I think it was about 79th and I can't think of the cross street, but that was a full-scale depot underground in a suburban neighborhood, and he'd get down there, and the conductor, the train pulled up, the conductor waved, grabbed his luggage for him, and took him to the car that the mayor was in, and then I'm told the big card game began for the trip, and it was made a couple of stops along the way, but that was in. And he had a lot of those trips to Washington when I was little. In fact, he was in Washington when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and my poor mother was alone by herself, and I was listening to it on the radio, not understanding what it was, but that it was something important. And for us, that it was a late night thing because it was the next day in the islands down there, and of course communication wasn't any good. So by the time we got words of it in the Midwest, it was 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and they were on their way to bed down in the islands. But I remember that it just happened to be a significant night. I threw a fruit can or something at my wife or my mother, and she always reminded me that's how we remember the start of World War II. Small information. But after that, it was close your blinds and put a little mask over the automobile lights if you were traveling after 4 o'clock. So, in any event, enough with World War II.
So for high school, when you kind of get into that area, so what high school did you attend?
Leo High School in Chicago, 79th Street West. The school technically was run by the Monsignor who ran St. Leo Parish, but the school was named after a different St. Leo, and he was somebody, I think, he was the Pope that sanctioned the creation of the Irish Christian Brothers many years before that. So that's how that came about. The officers of the school were all Christian Brothers, and most of them had come from Europe, and they ended up at schools in New York because there was a large Irish population there, and as a result, some of the better teachers we got came from New York through the Christian Brothers tunnel, and they set up my school, Leo High School, and then there were two other Catholic schools in Chicago. Both my cousins went to the second one. I don't remember the name of it, but they appreciate their education just as I do. It was a good solid education, and I never complained about going to jug because I was talking over the lunch hour during the silence time or saying a bad thing about somebody while we were out having our smoking break.
Did you do anything in your free time in high school, or anything in particular that you like to do?
Well, during the winter I'd go home and do my homework and watch television. During the summer I'd go find out what some of the guys from the Catholic Tech School were doing, because they always, for a project, had volunteered to change the oil in a neighbor's car or change flat tires or stuff like that. And because around these apartment buildings, there were big backyards that hadn't been developed. Those were to be low-rise houses on the other street. But that became the parking spot for everybody. If they didn't want to park a mile away on the street, they got home late, go park in the lot. So we'd always go down there, 2 or 3 people, had a gang of kids under the car, changing the oil, everything like that. And I think the people just did that to keep the kids busy. We had one old guy there would have his oil changed once a week. And then one day they used the wrong oil and the engine sized up. That was the last job with that for those guys. So.
Did you have any other memories that you enjoyed growing up in high school?
Well, there was always some social thing going on. It was a dance at the school, or a prom at one of the hotels along the Lake Michigan shore in the 7900 block of Chicago South. When you get on to 78th and it goes down, it was right on the lakefront. It was a beautiful picture, and they started building hotels there. Big hotels, nice hotels, and they found out that they could make more money by selling the homes than using it as a hotel. And that area was populated very, very fast. And I was to a wedding down there. She and I were there about, I think, 3-4 years ago, and I was amazed at how that area had grown up. Old St. Philip Neri Parish. That's where my dad went to school, grade school. 79th and Coles Avenue. Now that's way east into the lake, and had 2 railroads running through the middle of town. You could have a train in your backyard. There was the overhead electric, Illinois, Indiana electric service, and the other one was one of the big railroads that served. It was not the Santa Fe, it was their competitor. And they ran all the commuter trains. There was a train through there every 2 minutes. That one route served large areas of the downtown business area, and then continued on up to the residents on the north side for people who worked up there but lived on the south side. So it was always fun to go over there. If you wanted to watch trains, you just go over there and get your chair and watch, and they'd come through.
Did you ever collect toy trains growing up? Or
Ever what?
Collect toy trains growing up? Or?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I had all of them, and my dad, who loved to work in the basement, making things, and during the war, I remember all Christmas toys. We had some DC-4 bombers, great big things. He made them from hand in the basement after I went to bed, and they were really nice. But we had a model railroad thing that, feet and feet and feet of plywood all hooked together, and wires. I couldn't run it because he had all these different sections wired that if another train entered that area, the train would stop, all the power would go off. And but I loved that you could work. In the wintertime, you go down there on a weekend, you wouldn't come up. Mother would send you a sandwich, and you could work down there till midnight, running the different trains. And he'd go by a used railroad place and find a good locomotive, and all of a sudden we got another one to go on. So that's when we left, we had to give it all up. And the people who bought the house didn't want all of it, but they wanted it in the back. They wanted those because they had mountains in them. They would figure their kid would grow up and be an engineer. So in the event, that's what I did. Work on things in the basement.
Did you ever take the train or travel outside of Chicago growing up?
Oh yeah. We had a summer home in Eagle River, and as soon as May came along, my grandmother and one of her friends wanted to go up to the house and open it up so everybody could come up. So first day out of school, we were down 6:30 at Union Station for the Chicago Northwestern. Went up the lakefront as far as Green Bay and then cut west and got right up to Eagle River. That's where we got off. Then went on to the lakes in the Michigan, Great Lakes or Grand Haven Lakes or something. So it was interesting being out of the city in the summer. I missed a lot of stuff, but I enjoyed my time in Eagle River.
What type of things would you do when you were up in Eagle River for the summer?
Well, you're always changing. You had two big tanks. They, at least one of them once a week, you had to change those. That was a 2-hour job because if you weren't careful, big trouble. You always had our house. You had a workroom and a tool place and everything like that. But you step outside, they got another building, and one is a building with 2 different refrigerators and freezers and a freezer. So all the frozen goods were kept out there rather than putting stuff taking up valuable space in the refrigerator in the house. So, and you'd often get dropped up there by a member of the family, and you and your aunts were up there, but no transportation. So they had, was an elderly woman ran a 3-cab service out of Eagle River. My grandmother called her up and chit-chatted and decided they had a friend. So every other day, I can't think of what her name was, but she'd show up with her brand new Chevrolet cab, red, white, and blue trim around it, but it was a black car before that. Honk, 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 and was off for 2 hours of shopping at Eagle River. We did that 3 times a week, I think. But you find other things to do. We had a boat, and there was a boat there, Chris Craft. There was a 18-foot, 21-foot wooden fishing boat with a Johnson pull start motor. And then there was my favorite 2-pontoon bicycle boat, which you couldn't travel very far because your legs would start to fall off. But if the weather was nice, then it's fun to go right around on that. And see 2 people in the back. But most of the times, well, I didn't sleep late. I got up early because there was lots of stuff to do. But I went to bed early because it got dark early, and you didn't get anything on television. That they'd kind of go off the air. So listen to a lot of baseball games out of Milwaukee. The Chicago teams came up there to play. I don't remember what the team was. It was, I think, the Braves or something. and they had a name for one of the teams earlier. I don't remember, but that got switched for some reason. Then they became the Milwaukee Braves. That was about it. Radio reception wasn't all that good up there. The local stations from Rhinelander and Madison, you could occasionally get a station at night. And one or two other towns had 24-hour stations. And then they just carry over the news from the networks. So I ate a lot.
What sort of music would you listen to when you were growing up?
Whatever records were popular, we had to put the record on one at a time, but I'd buy maybe a record once a month. Then you play that, and everybody gets sick of hearing it. But I always had nice orchestra music, because that's what I enjoyed. So. Then everybody else that came to the house enjoyed it, except you hear the same song for the 50th time, you don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
So your senior year, what made you decide to leave Chicago and go to Marquette University?
Well, I looked at a couple of universities. I didn't know very much about Milwaukee, but we had several friends who had kids that went to Marquette and had also gone to Leo or one of the other Catholic schools. And an amazing number of kids from Chicago that my parents knew either went to the medical school up here or the dental school. So they'd say, oh, Jackie so-and-so is at the dental school. He just got in. Well, he lives downtown Milwaukee near the Schrader Hotel. We drove up here one day, and you look out, and the rear end of the campus looks out over a huge railroad yard, and which had main lines going through it, and one of those Chicago North, they called them the 400, Flambeau 400, was their key passenger change, and I think 3 of them went north. Now I think it's 5, but they're commuter trains and they don't go very far. So, but there was good railroad service up there.
Did you have any friends from your school that you became friends with in college or grew closer to?
I didn't. Nobody from my old neighborhood in Chicago had a room up there. One of the guys that went to my school was staying with some people for the summer. Billy O'Malley, big redheaded guy, and he'd come over. He wasn't allowed to drive the car, but the relative he lived with had a tractor for mowing the lawn and the weeds and stuff like that. It was a big property. It was a place his grandfather owned, and the grandfather was a big man with one of the major studios. And he didn't make pictures, but he owned theaters. And those days you made nothing but money. So we'd go over and borrow from him when we needed anything. That was a lot of fun.
Do you know what the atmosphere was like at Marquette when you were in college?
It was pretty conservative, Catholic. They didn't have, they didn't have lines that you had to belong to this fraternity, or you don't get in, or you have to be with this group or vote that way to get in. It was wide open. Occasionally the people would tangle with each other, but the university they're a very conservative university. But if you came and in the summer, if I was up here for summer school or because I had a job, I think 3 of the brothers from the high school I went to were up in the summer graduate program. So I went over to see them, and I knew the right places to go. 2 of them were old enough to get beer up here. I think you could get it at 18. So off we went. Hi, Father. Hi, Father. Oh, that's Brother Bruiser. Don't talk back to him. So.
When you were at Marquette and living in Milwaukee, what was your favorite activity to do in college?
Try to get a baseball ticket every so often. I wasn't a big baseball fan particularly, but hang around the campus, there was always something going on. You go to that or go join. There were dozens of clubs that were, I don't know if they were sanctioned by the university or not, but they always had something going on. You go in, you pay your $5, and the good news is we only have 1 bar. Boo. We have 13 bartenders. Hey, 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 hey. Yeah. Bar is only open until 9 o'clock. Oh. But the other bar is just on the other side of the building, open until 4 in the morning. Hey, hey. Those things would go on.
So what did you decide to study when you were in college?
Well, I wasn't big on being a scientist or anything like that, but I saw they had a broadcasting program in their school of speech, and I went through and looked at some of those things and met 1 or 2 of the people who were teaching, and one was Joe Staudacher, who taught at Marquette, and his brother was on the radio station that she worked at later. And when she came here, when she got out of college and got a job in Milwaukee, and then just dragged me off, and the rest is history.
So for your degree in broadcasting, did you have a job after college lined up?
No. But the school gave you little part-time jobs. And I'd work at different places, usually rough hours where you'd have to take the bus to their studio and or take your weekend to go and maybe move papers around or something like that, or help put the records on. Something for you to do because you're being paid by some station owner who thinks he's getting you college credits. Yeah.
Did you do any technical work with the radio station, or
No.
was it mainly just cleaning up?
No. Most of them required a license. I had a Class 2 license, though. I just did that to see if I could pass the test. Went down to Chicago and took the license and got it. So.
After college, once you graduated, did you have a job that you went into or a field that you did?
Uh, I I think I went to Chicago, and did I have some part-time job up here? Do you remember? No. But well, the first job I got was freshman year in law school. I went out and I got a job, but it wasn't. It was working for a law firm, but not doing the big stuff where you went to court. It was to keep the library clean, keep everything else clean, make sure and that's a terrible job. Every law firm has dozens and dozens of collections from different systems that publish stuff like that. And every month you get, here are the new inserts. How many people get something like this? Well, there's 7 in your section, so take care of those. Well, off to go.
And where did you get your law degree? Where did you go to law school?
Pardon, what?
Where did you go to law school?
Marquette.
What made you decide to get a law degree?
I wasn't all that interested in it, but my dad said, if we can afford it, why don't you give it a shot and see if you can make it through the first year? And I decided to sign up for it. I also got involved in helping run a political campaign for the Attorney General, John Reynolds, who was elected a governor, and a guy I got to know pretty well. In fact, many people in his family live around here, and I know those folks. She knows those folks. So I did that. It was something different, and I would drive him on occasion, and he loved to talk. And I told him that I thought I was going to take a part-time job with the governor and give up law school. Stopped the car. He wanted to talk to me, how valuable my education was. I was at a great school. Sounded like I was off to a good start. He was going to ask around about me. I should stay in the law school. So I stayed in the law school.
You said you worked with John Reynolds. How did you get into that situation?
Completely by accident. A friend of mine was working on the campaign and dragged me along to a couple of things to meet him. And we just got to like him, and when the other guy wasn't available, if it was a daytime deal, go get the car, and he's at the freighter, or at one of the hotels, pick him up at 7 o'clock. He's got to go here at 9 o'clock. He's got to be there for the last fish fry. And by 10 o'clock, take him home and put him in the Schrader Hotel bar. But make sure he doesn't have more than 2. Push him up to the bed, because we got to get him up early tomorrow. So, well, John Reynolds, come on and have a beer. Oh,
What was that like? Was it tiring to kind of go through that every day, or was it more?
Well, this for me was a summer job, and when I had to go back to school, I only did stuff on a weekend. He said, "I'm not going to, you want to stay on a partial payroll for part-time work. we could do that and, work stuff up for weekends, and you could still go to law school. And he was very, very, very emphatic about not interrupting law school even for a job with a possible attorney general, because it's too hard to make up the distance. It'll take you 3-4 more years. And by that time, everything you learned at the first end of your career had changed by the end of your career. And you didn't want to have to learn all that stuff over again. So he said, I'll help you along if you need help. And he was very, very gracious about the whole thing. And in any event, he turned out to be more popular than anybody understood, and he got elected. And I went back to law school, got a few good grades to keep me in, and then grades started getting better.
Once you graduated from your law degree, what was your first job outside of that?
I knew from political involvement with different candidates, some lawyers that were also very active in the Democratic Party. And a couple of them had a couple of lawyers that needed help. And one of them hired me, and I got to work for a guy named Bill Bachman. His family owned a furniture store, so there was always legal work there. Plus he had been, I think he had spent a year at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So you learned what he did there, and he did some practice in front of the federal court, so that was helpful. And I followed up with those guys for a while. I went in with a couple other guys, and we formed up a firm, and we kind of centered around an older lawyer who seemed to know what was going on. The problem is, as the year went by, we found that he was doing a lot of stuff, getting cash from clients and not letting the underlings know what's going on, or was getting paid in kind. Somebody calls him and said, we deliver the icebox to Fred's house. Oh, I'll tell him. So what about those guys that own that furniture store? I don't know, we're not going to send him a bill. He feels sorry for him. That was the refrigerator coming to somebody's house instead. And that's a bad habit to get into in the practice of law. Taking favors like that will get you in trouble tax-wise. So, and ethically, it's not a real good idea either. So, I moved on.
Do you remember the name of the law firm?
Well, the one I actually worked for full-time was Sampson Nash. Harold Sampson, and he was also in the bank business. They owned a couple of banks. First National Bank in Glendale was their first bank and my first banking client. So these guys were legit. And one of them had a lawyer who was about 2 years younger than I was. And he didn't want to be in banking. He got a job as a deputy attorney general, or a deputy state's attorney in Milwaukee. So they needed a lawyer. They hired me, and I became pretty good friends with this guy, even though he was in the U.S. Attorney's, or in the state attorney's office. When he came to work, I knew him well enough that he didn't want to get all the work I had dumped on him, because I had a fairly decent load of stuff these guys would give me. And I'd do it. I'd keep a file on my own and everything. So I started sharing those with him, and that worked out for a while. Then he, I don't know, had a habit of going to Las Vegas on weekends and not doing anything illegal, just get out of town for the weekend. And most lawyers know your best work time is take your books home, and Saturday and Sunday are good work days at your dining room table. And I had to do that, which I was happy to do. So
what kind of law were you practicing?
Well, first of all, we got, and I'm trying to remember who it is. It was a big mortgage company, and they were always foreclosing mortgages. And I had to prepare all the papers and all the documents that had to be recorded, and then I had to get a witness to testify about the breach. One of the judges said, "You're the lawyer, you can do it." Really? So I made my script up, and Monday morning I went to the collection line. All the collection lawyers got there first, because those things were taken. The collection lawyers, small claims lawyers, they might have 50 small claims on the list, but they had put all his or her clients in a list, and they'd take them in a bunch. No objection, no. I read them off, and the guy would read them off. Somebody'd move adoption, and court approved, and you finish that collection for the day. So I got good at that too, and started picking up a lot of collection work that the big lawyers didn't like to do.
So you talked about mortgages in Milwaukee and filing claims for it. Was there issues with housing going on in Milwaukee at the time?
The only issue of housing was mixed housing, and this was the time of Father Grappi marching over a lack of equality in the housing system. But I kind of followed that more for the political entertainment than getting involved.
Where were you living after you graduated from Marquette?
Let's see. I lived somewhere on 25th Street with a couple of roommates. Then I got married, and I'm trying to remember where we had moved, down on that Angle Avenue, past the big park up around 58th Street. And then we started. It was next to a big county park, and then we started looking for a better place, and we found it, and we moved to a couple of small places we weren't at very long. I don't remember where they were, but we moved to 62nd and Lloyd, which was literally on the border between Milwaukee and Wauwatosa. And we lived there for a while, met a lot of friends, a lot of neighbors. It was a very hospitable area. So that was until we could buy a house.
So you had moved out of law school right around the 60s. And
I was finished with law school.
Finished with law school.
Yeah.
Do you remember, you had talked about Father Grappi previously, like the housing issues going on and stuff with like the Milwaukee riots as well?
Well, that grew out of the Grappy movement. The people started taking different sides, and there were more sides, and some of the sides were just downright, they didn't care what happened to Father Grappy. They wanted him out. They wanted the certain neighborhoods just segregated, and the city wasn't going to do it. So it was go out and march and break some windows and stuff like that. But the city froze up. The city shut down after 6 o'clock. We were living in Wauwatosa, and Wauwatosa did too. So all the neighbors would come out and sit in their front porch. Your car had to be off the street. Squad car would go by. We'd say hi to the police, and everybody is drinking beer in the summer on the neighbor's porch. Well, that wasn't something that really negatively hurt Wauwatosa, where we lived at least. And then we got out of later. We got out of Wauwatosa because it was obvious that taxes in Milwaukee County were just going to go up and go up and go up, whereas the suburban counties were going up in little nips and pieces. So, but it worked out okay.
So you had talked about getting married as well. How did you meet your wife?
She worked at the same radio station I did. She had gone to college in Waukesha, and she graduated and came out and got a job, and here I was a new face of the block too, so we got along pretty good. She managed a lot of the bookkeeping, including what records get played and when, and if I messed that up, I'd get a nasty note from her.
Do you remember what radio station?
What?
Do you remember what radio station?
It was WMIL. And I don't know if you'll remember back, but one of its characters on the paper was it was a Polish guy coming up with a fancy name and playing polka music, and I can't remember what his name was, and any of it. The other people were, they were played, stuff that appealed to children or a particular ethnic audience, and they did pretty well. They also had a station, an FM station, out in Glendale. So I worked on that for a little while too, because I think the AM station went off the air at midnight.
Did you have any kids as well?
Any what?
Any kids?
Well, after we got married, John came along, was the light of our life, and then my daughter Christine, and Daniel, and actually he was the baby. Katie was at the third line, I think. So, and then Daniel was the final one in the trap, and they all followed along and went to Wisconsin and Marquette. Both boys are lawyers, and the girls went on to graduate school if they wanted to, and other stuff, economics, things like that.
Did you root for any sports teams at the time as well, like in that range?
Well, for a long time I was a Chicago Bears fan, and I lived in the south side of Chicago, but everybody loved the Bears, and because I'm trying to remember what the name of the football team was, the Bears or the Red Sox. The people had, or the Sox people. I don't remember the name. But that changed its name and moved somewhere else. It's still in existence, but under a different name. So, occasionally get a ticket up to Sox Park and watch the game and watch the weather was always cold, so everybody brought their bottle with them. And the interesting thing was about the third quarter, those who were drinking heavily decided it was okay to walk out in the field. And they'd get hit by a player and carried off the field, and if you could walk, you were arrested. But fortunately, the tickets we got were in a closed box, which on one side was all radio and television, on the other side was all sports wire, newspapers, things like that. And they always had tons and tons of hot coffee. And my dad knew most of the guys that were in that. So he'd take me up there, we'd go see that. And that was fun to watch. The Bears.
Do you still root for Chicago, or have you transitioned to Milwaukee?
Well, I follow the Bears. They're an interesting team, and they have interesting people that follow them, even in bad times. They sell out at Soldier Field for the Bears games. It's a big deal down there. So.
Did you root for any Milwaukee sports teams when you were in the area besides the Brewers?
Well, I got to like the Braves, and of course, when I came here, every lamppost had a cardboard Brave on it, and that's when they were going hot and heavy. I don't remember anything about who, but the team went to Alabama or somewhere like that after a couple of years. And I think they lost the World Series that they were in. Got knocked out in 5 games, I think.
What was the reaction like, or how did you feel like when they relocated out of Milwaukee?
Well, I kind of said some of the same things other people did. You know, who are these guys to just come down here and throw their money around? And it was kind of disappointing that there was nobody here that had the money to throw in. Bud Selick, the used car dealer, was looking to stop this, but he couldn't raise the money. And outside people didn't think Milwaukee was big enough or that it was interested enough. But as it turned out, they'd get a team and they could fill that stadium up. So things worked out. It just took a little longer than anybody expected.
So when they relocated back to Milwaukee from Atlanta, how did you handle it, and did you attend more sporting events once they came back as the Brewers?
Well, we had a little group that would go. We went less than 5 games a year, maybe even less than 4. But we go out there and an hour and a half early and get the grill out and the food would be fixed. And I don't know how many couples there were, but we did that for quite a few games, and it was a lot of fun. That was when they were at Old County Stadium, before the new one was built.
Was there any other like Milwaukee events that you enjoyed going to besides the Brewers?
No. There was there was Marquette football. But they had lost 99 straight games or something when I came to school here. So that, after about 2 years, folded and the university dropped men's football altogether and caused a big scream, but the game went away and disappeared at Marquette. And it was too bad. They tried to bring it back at times, but nobody was interested. So, I don't know what they're doing now.
Did you ever pay attention to basketball with the Bucks?
Not initially, although we had a chance to get some season tickets along with somebody else down to the low area at the arena, which was a good place to watch a game. And that was the day of the guy from Ohio, the fellow from New York, the big tall guy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I can't remember some of the smaller players, I should say, but we had some good games, and we'd go. And I would enjoy them, and she'd enjoy them too. And if we couldn't go, we always knew somebody who was ready, willing, and able, including your father. Yeah.
Do you remember the 1971 championship?
Yes. I think he went to one of those games with me. And some guy, as a joke, came and pushed me. And his bodyguard, or a policeman, nearly grabbed your father. But everybody figured out right away it was a joke. And we went on our way. Can't remember who that was. But that was, Abdul-Jabbar was there and playing and putting on some real good teams and some real good games. And I can't think of the names of all of the players, but the other positions were very, very well filled. I don't remember the name of the coaches, but they were adequate.
What was the city's reaction to the championship?
Oh, everybody was very excited. That game was a sellout. All the games around it were sellouts. Yeah, and there was a march down the avenue, and I'm trying to remember, I think they won that series, and they had a parade down Wisconsin Avenue with all the players hanging out of two buses, waving to everybody. I hope all that's right.
You said you had season tickets.
Yeah.
Do you know how long you had season tickets for?
Oh, maybe 5, 6 years at the most. Then we started going to some Marquette games. But we started to get good seats in the Marquette games after the seating was based on how much you contribute, and the good seats were usually taken. So, but I had enough money in there that we could get a decent ticket, and then when you get it, you hang on to it. So,
did you witness the 1977 national championship Marquette won as well?
where that? No. Oh, wait a minute. Where was it?
Or
Huh?
Did you watch the game?
Oh, yeah, probably. We were at the game where Al McGuire jumped up on the table, and that brought everybody to their feet. He was protesting a call. He was a colorful guy to watch as a coach. And I think he just attracted the big percent of the audience that came.
So going back to your career in law, once you were in the law firm, did you do any like notable cases in the city of Milwaukee that were important or well known?
Well, I was in a lot of real estate cases, because that's an area I was interested in. And believe it or not, one of the companies that was always moving real estate around and needed a lawyer was Miller Brewing Company. So they just became a regular corporate client. And some of my neighbors here worked at before the brewery was sold, and also working for the insurance company. I have the insurance. I can't think of the name of Northwestern Mutual Insurance. They always had some project going on with their property because they were growing so fast. So I ended up handling the zoning and the redrawing of plats. So cars were efficiently parked and things like that. So can I take a break?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, take a quick break.
Okay.
And so transitioning from your legal career into the political side of things, aside from the Attorney General campaign, how'd you get involved in politics in Milwaukee?
Well, a classmate of mine and a long-time friend, a fellow named Bill Drew, was very active in the state level young Democrats in Wisconsin. And he'd give me little projects to work on. They were fun. They'd have regional meetings around the state, and everybody would pile in everybody else's car and go up and have their meeting and fight about stuff. And it was interesting. It was politics on a much smaller version. One of the more interesting things was an event that involved the Kennedy campaign, and Kennedy had been kind of going all over the state. He just come in and hit this place real hard for about 6 months, and everybody was asking the question why he didn't come to Marquette. And some of the people that ran, like the Union and the other places to meet, were kind of hesitant that this will bring an unfortunate series of conversations, because Kennedy was Catholic, the university was Catholic, and there will be the argument that we're endorsing him, we're giving him a break, we're giving him our time, everything like that. And his people said, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. We know a lot of Marquette people. They're not Catholic, they're supporting us. We know a lot of Marquette people who are Catholic and they're not supporting us. They don't like us. And so I started talking around with some of the people, and it turned out we knew the guy who was now appointed to run Kennedy's campaign in Wisconsin. He was a fellow from Kenosha, and he was very active in the union for the auto workers. And he was all over this campaign. And he called us periodically, myself and one of my then roommates, to do things with the party or to come to some member of the Kennedy family would be in town and they wanted to have a crowd. So we'd call everybody in the dorm and say, we're going down to see Bob Kennedy's or Jack Kennedy's brother and his brother-in-law. They're going to be down at this hotel for a cocktail party. And of course that was for the high-end people. But a crowd was a crowd as far as they were concerned. And the Kennedy family they were very good mixing with people. So we started doing stuff like that. And it was really a lot of fun. And finally the pressure was on by local people who had contributed to Marquette over the years and said, this is kind of foolish. Why don't you invite Kennedy to come to, well, we don't have any room. And we kind of got the word that the university didn't really turn it down. It's just that, well, we shouldn't be doing this at this time and everything like that. And by accident, in looking for a place, there was a basketball team of Marquette was having some growing pains. They had a new coach named Eddie Hickey. And Eddie was a Catholic. He was very, very interested in the Kennedy campaign and said, well, if he comes here, I'd love to be able to get in the faculty line and meet him. I said, well, just no problem at all. And so soon enough, there was an opportunity to come. And one of Richard Cudahy, who was Cudahy Meatpacking, asked the university to make something available. And he was a very big contributor. Two other people, one a banker and one the president of a brewery, also made the same request. And the university kind of, we're looking, we're doing the best we can. And finally, Eddie Hickey said, how about using the state matches with the date that our gym is going to be free, because the team is on a 3-game schedule away. And the athletic department people kind of looked the other way and said, well, if some of us, yeah, we can do it. So we got that up and running and made sure that the wealthier families in town that had helped us were right in the front row. I had some guys down there that just parked that up. If your name wasn't a certain name, you couldn't sit in this front row, even though it was a students get together. It turned out there were going to be 2 front rows. There were 18 front rows filled up with these people. And the Kennedy people said, let them in. Now that's not a publicly known event. I don't think it's a big event, but people make fun of that Kennedy, because he was a Catholic, could do all sorts of bad things. Not true. So, any event, he came that night We were worried that he wasn't going to make it because there was a terrible snowstorm here. And he was on his plane flying up here. And I think what he did is they flew into Madison and just started driving down here, and we moved the plane in the morning. But in any event, he got here as that place was filling up. And we announced that he'd be here in a few minutes. Everybody took a seat. There wasn't a empty seat in the world, so I was going to get to introduce Kennedy, but we had a professor who was an avid Democrat, who was the faculty representative for the Young Democrats of Wisconsin at Marquette. And we asked him to do it. And he was overwhelmed. He said, "I don't believe it." I said, "Sure." Well, when Kennedy got here, he started talking with Kennedy, and they got along just fine. And finally, the police was there in droves because the weather was so bad, and he had, I think, 16 motorcycle escort to move his group of cars because the weather was so bad. And a couple of the policemen said, "Look, how long is this going to last?" And I gave an estimate. And they said, "We got to go down to Racine. And they're going to close the highways." And he said, "I don't know what the senator would want to do. He may want to stay here for the night, but our orders from the political people, he goes." So I told all the people in the front rows, and they stood up and started to applaud, and whoever didn't have a seat rushed into the place, and pretty soon you couldn't see the windows around the way. There were so many people in there. And Wofford went, and he came out, and we introduced the professor, who was our moderator, and he introduced Senator Kennedy, and Kennedy got up and made just a lovely speech. And it was kind of a highlight on the campus for days after that. Kennedy was such an outstanding guy, and it was hard to see him, and yet here's the whole show. And in fact, they went a little longer because they were thinking about, well, why don't we just stay here in Milwaukee? But they didn't, and they finished it up. And if you're real good, I'll let you see some of the pictures from that event. So I'm going to have to wrap up here because my left eye, in which I'm partially blind, is being paralyzed by the light to the left.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. If you want to go in and look at the wall, there's some of the pictures on the wall of Kennedy visiting Marquette. An unknown thing. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.